The Star Wars galaxy has over a dozen distinct blaster types, and every single one was engineered for a specific job. From weapons small enough to hide in your boot to cannons that can crack a starfighter in half, each one fills a role that nothing else can. So today, I'm breaking down every blaster type and exactly what makes them different, starting with the one you're not supposed to have, Holdout Blaster. This is the blaster you carry when you're not supposed to be carrying a blaster. That's literally the entire point. Holdout blasters were designed from the ground up to be concealable. Their small size and low power output make them easy to slip past security checks, where a full-sized weapon would get flagged immediately, and the size matches the mission. We're talking a weapon compact enough to fit inside a boot, up a sleeve, or tucked into a hidden holster. The effective range is extremely limited because the barrel is barely there. Power output is weak compared to standard blaster pistols. You are not winning a firefight with this thing, but that's the point. This is not a combat weapon. It's a last resort. Spies, smugglers, and anyone who needed a hidden edge carried these specifically because they could get through a door that no other weapon could. Princess Leia's Defender Sporting Blaster is one of the most recognizable examples, a compact holdout designed to look elegant while still being functional. Now, fans go back and forth on these. Some argue holdout blasters are genuinely underrated assassination tools at close quarters. Others dismiss them as pure desperation weapons. Honestly, both are right. Up close with surprise, this thing is lethal. Beyond short range, you might as well throw it. But if the holdout is the weapon you hide, the next one is the weapon everyone sees coming. Blaster Pistol. The Blaster Pistol is the most recognized sidearm in science fiction, and that's almost entirely because of one smuggler who wasn't even supposed to be the main character. Here's the thing. On paper, the standard blaster pistol is fine. Bolts travel at roughly 130 meters per second. You get 50 to 100 shots per power pack. Effective range sits between 25 and 50 meters, with a sustained fire rate of about 4 to 6 bolts per second. For a sidearm, that's perfectly serviceable. Clone troopers carried the DC-17 as a backup. Officers holstered them across every faction in every era. It's the reliable, boring, does-the-job weapon that every military in the galaxy issues to its personnel. And then Han Solo showed up with a DL-44 and made every regulation sidearm in the galaxy irrelevant overnight. The DL-44 isn't standard military hardware. It's a smuggler's personal modification, basically the galactic equivalent of a guy souping up a Honda Civic in his garage. The original prop was a modified Mauser C96, which is a real German pistol from the 1890s. So the most iconic weapon in Star Wars history started life as a nearly 100-year-old handgun with some bits glued onto it, and it outfamed every purpose-built military blaster ever designed. That's the irony nobody talks about. The galaxy's most famous pistol isn't famous because of its specs. It's famous because Han Solo looked cool holding it. I remove him from the equation, and the blaster pistol is just a sidearm. Functional, forgettable, and permanently holstered on some officer's hip. But if a single pistol can define an entire weapon class through sheer charisma, wait until you see what happens when you give a blaster a longer barrel and an actual job. Heavy Blaster Pistol. Nobody was issued a heavy blaster pistol. That's the first thing you need to understand. Standard blaster pistols got handed out like candy at basic training. Heavy blaster pistols got purchased, personally, with your own credits, because you looked at the threats in your life and decided the standard option wasn't going to cut it. The specs back that up. We're talking significantly more firepower than a standard blaster pistol, with an effective range pushing out to around 120 meters. That's a serious upgrade over what a regular sidearm gives you. The trade-off is more weight, more recoil, and faster energy cell drain because the power output per bolt is substantially higher. So you're not spraying, you're picking your moments and making each one count. And that's exactly why mercenaries, bounty hunters, and military officers gravitated toward them. Carrying one was a statement. It said, I expect to be shot at by something that a regular pistol can't handle, and I can afford to survive it. Now, the most famous example is the DL-44, which is where things get messy. Fans have been arguing for years about whether Han's weapon is a heavy blaster pistol or its own separate category entirely. The official classification says heavy blaster pistol. The community says it's the DL-44. It transcends classification. Nobody's winning that debate anytime soon. The SE-14C sits more comfortably in the category, but it doesn't get a fraction of the attention because Harrison Ford never pointed one at a bounty hunter in a cantina. Also worth mentioning, heavy blaster pistols in video games are absolute monsters compared to their film depictions. In the movies, they drop one stormtrooper. In Battlefront, they drop entire hallways, which is, a slight discrepancy. But if you thought upgrading from pistol to heavy pistol was a big jump, wait until we add a stock extend the barrel, and enter carbine territory. Blaster Carbine. The Blaster Carbine is the most practical weapon in the entire Star Wars galaxy, and absolutely nobody cares about it, which is a shame because on paper, this thing is perfect. You've got a barrel length of 30 to 45 centimeters, and which gives you noticeably better accuracy than any pistol. Fire rate sits at 6 to 8 bolts per second. Effective range pushes out to 100, sometimes 150 meters. And it does all of this while staying lighter and more compact than a full-sized rifle. It's the tactical sweet spot, more punch than a sidearm, more maneuverability than a rifle, and small enough to clear hallways and urban corridors without bumping into every doorframe you walk through. The military clearly agrees. The A280-CFE became a Rebel Alliance staple, and the DC-15S was standard issue for clone troopers across the entire Republic Army. Stormtroopers carried carbine variants too. Basically, if a galactic military needed to equip millions of soldiers with one versatile, do-everything weapon, they picked the carbine, every single time. But here's the thing. Despite being the weapon that actual military doctrine would favor, the carbine is almost never the protagonist's weapon of choice. Han Solo grabs a pistol. Luke grabs a pistol. Mandalorians reach for pistols or heavy ordnance. Nobody in a Star Wars film has ever held up a carbine and had a hero moment with it. It's the Honda Civic of blasters. Reliable, efficient, gets you where you need to go, and completely invisible in a parking lot full of sports cars. Star Wars storytelling wants drama. It wants the intimacy of a sidearm duel, or the spectacle of a heavy cannon ripping through a wall. The carbine just quietly does its job in the background, which is exactly why it never gets the spotlight. But if you think being overlooked is rough, wait until we talk about the weapon that gets all the screen time and none of the respect. Blaster Rifle. This is the AK-47 of the Star Wars galaxy. Every faction has used it. Every soldier has carried one. Every single major conflict in galactic history has been defined by whoever had more of these pointed in the right direction. The Blaster Rifle is the baseline infantry weapon, and its design reflects that. You're looking at a compact, versatile platform built for frontline use, with enough range to hold a corridor and enough firepower to suppress a position. It does everything you need a weapon to do at the scale you need it done. Nothing fancy, just reliable, effective, and everywhere. And no blaster rifle is more everywhere than the E11. The Stormtrooper rifle didn't just define Imperial infantry, it defined Imperial aesthetics. That sleek, compact silhouette became the visual shorthand for the Empire itself, across decades of storytelling. You see an E11, you know exactly what you're dealing with. Here's the thing though, the E11 is a perfectly capable weapon. Solid range, solid fire rate, solid capacity. The running joke about stormtroopers not being able to hit the broadside of a bantha exists entirely because of the soldiers holding it, not the rifle itself. The weapon works fine. The Imperial training program apparently does not. And honestly, the clone troopers proved this. The DC-15A blaster rifle, the standard long-range weapon of the Grand Army of the Republic, was arguably a superior weapon in the hands of soldiers who could actually aim. Clones were bred and trained for combat from birth. Stormtroopers were conscripted or recruited, given a helmet they could barely see out of, not ideal, and told to go secure the galaxy. The rifle didn't get worse. The workforce did. But if the blaster rifle is the universal language of infantry warfare, wait until you hear about the weapon designed to make sure you never see the person shooting it. Sniper rifle. Here's a weapon that technically exists in Star Wars, but the franchise treats it like an embarrassing relative at a family reunion. You know it's there. Everyone knows it's there. Nobody's going to acknowledge it. Sniper rifles in the Star Wars galaxy are genuinely impressive pieces of engineering. Extended barrels with precision focusing lenses that can maintain bolt coherence well beyond a kilometer depending on the configuration. The trade-off is a significantly reduced firing rate because each shot requires careful energy regulation to maintain that pinpoint accuracy. Power cell capacity is limited compared to standard blaster rifles, with the user expected to make every single shot count. This is not a weapon you hand to a standard trooper and say, figure it out. Sniper rifles require extensive specialist training, patience, and a temperament that most infantry soldiers simply don't have. It's the most skill-intensive blaster category by a significant margin. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite being the most tactically logical weapon for a galaxy full of long-range engagements across open battlefields, sniper rifles are almost completely absent from the Star Wars films. And that's not an accident. Star Wars wants duels. it wants standoffs. It wants two people staring each other down in a hallway before blasters start firing. Sniping someone from hundreds of meters away is efficient, practical, and completely devoid of dramatic tension. You can't have a heroic moment when the villain just drops dead from a bolt nobody saw coming. That's not mythology. That's Tuesday at a military base. Fans have pointed this out for years. Jedi can sense danger through the Force. They have precognitive reflexes. Logically, a Force-sensitive sniper would be one of the most devastating combatants in the galaxy, but the franchise will never fully go there because watching someone lie on a rooftop for 40 minutes isn't exactly the hero's journey. The sniper rifle is the most honest weapon in Star Wars, and that's exactly why the story doesn't want it around. But if you think long-range precision is underappreciated, wait until you see what happens when the galaxy decides accuracy doesn't matter at all. Sporting. Blaster. Every other blaster on this list exists because someone needs to kill someone else. The sporting blaster exists because a farmer on some backwater moon needs to stop a 300-pound predator from eating his livestock. And honestly, that might be the most interesting thing about it. Sporting blasters are civilian-grade weapons built for hunting, target practice, and general pleas. Don't let that thing get any closer situations. They're deliberately lower powered than their military counterparts, because when you're a moisture farmer on the outer rim, you can't exactly walk into a repair shop every time your barrel melts. Effective range is shorter than what a soldier would accept, but more than enough for dropping wildlife at reasonable distance. They're lighter than military variants, easier to maintain, and designed for people who have zero combat training but very real problems with local wildlife. And here's the thing, these weapons reveal an entire layer of the Star Wars galaxy that the movies basically pretend doesn't exist. Thousands of agricultural worlds, remote settlements, frontier colonies, all full of normal people living normal lives who need a reliable blaster the same way a rancher needs a rifle. The ELG-3A, commonly associated with Naboo, is probably the most well-known example of a sporting class blaster finding its way into the spotlight. Because apparently, even in a galaxy plagued by constant galactic war, people still want their personal firearm to look elegant, which is, so extremely human, but this is the real takeaway. There's a thriving civilian arms culture spanning thousands of worlds that is almost completely invisible in every major Star Wars story ever told. Farmers shooting predators, settlers defending homesteads, hunters tracking game across alien forests. None of that makes it into the films because it's not dramatic enough, but it's the foundation everything else is built on. Of course, some blasters aren't designed for precision or personal defense. Some are designed to make sure absolutely nothing in front of you is still standing. Sonic Blaster. Every blaster we've covered so far fires some variation of plasma. This one fires sound. That's it. Concentrated acoustic waves launched at a target with enough force to knock them down, disorient them, or at higher settings, liquefy internal organs. The Sonic Blaster is the weird kid at the table, and honestly, it deserves more respect than it gets. The most famous users are the Geonosians, who built sonic weapons into their culture and military. Their sonic blasters fired concentrated sound that could cause serious physical damage, not just discomfort. But the real limitation is environmental conductivity. Sound waves need a medium to travel through, and how well they travel depends on atmosphere, density, humidity, temperature, all of which change constantly in a combat scenario. You could fire a sonic blaster in one corridor and get devastating results, then fire the exact same weapon in a vacuum and get literally nothing, which is, not ideal. This inconsistency is exactly why sonic weapons never became standard issue across the galaxy. So when your weapon straight up stops working in certain environments, most militaries are going to pass. But on planets with thick atmospheres, these things were genuinely terrifying. A weapon that could rupture organs, shatter bones, and cause massive internal trauma without leaving a visible mark. In practice, sonic blasters were absolutely lethal, not some gentle crowd control tool. And here's where it gets interesting. Despite being devastating in the right conditions, the Star Wars universe mostly sidelines sonic weaponry after the Clone Wars. The Geonosians used them to brutal effect against clone troopers on Geonosis, and then the galaxy just kind of moved on, which tells you everything about how the franchise treats non-standard weaponry. If it doesn't glow and make a cool noise, it gets forgotten. But if the Sonic Blaster feels like a forgotten footnote, the next entry is a cultural institution that hits harder than most military hardware, Ion Blaster. The Republic fought an entire war against droids, millions of them, entire armies of nothing but clanking metal targets. And somehow, ion blasters never became standard issue. Let that sink in for a second. Ion blasters fire ionized particle bolts specifically designed to disrupt electrical systems. We're talking droids, computers, shielded technology, anything running on a circuit board. One clean hit and a battle droid goes from combat ready to expensive paperweight. They are devastatingly effective against mechanical targets. Like, embarrassingly effective. Each a single ion bolt can overload and shut down systems that would take multiple standard blaster shots to destroy. But here's the thing, that's all they're good at. Against organic targets, ion blasters are basically glorified flashlights. They can cause some pain and disorientation, sure, but you're not dropping anybody in a real firefight. The ionized bolts lose coherence and effectiveness over distance compared to standard blaster fire, and the overall output just isn't built for taking down living targets. So you've got a weapon that only truly works on one type of enemy, which is, not ideal. This creates maybe the dumbest tactical gap in the entire Star Wars galaxy. Droids are everywhere. They fight wars, they guard facilities, they run security for half the galaxy's criminal empires. And yet the weapon specifically designed to counter them is so situational that almost nobody carries one. The clone army spent 3 years fighting literally nothing but droids and still handed every trooper a standard DC-15 blaster rifle. Hey guys, what if we gave them the gun that instantly kills the enemy? Nah, let's not. And don't even get me started on the Jedi. An entire order facing down droid armies for years and not a single one thought to clip an ion pistol to their belt. Just in case. Cool. Add that to the list. But if the ion blaster's problem is being too specialized, the next one has the opposite issue. It barely qualifies as a weapon at all. Repeating blaster. Every blaster we've talked about so far has one thing in common. They're personal weapons. You point them at a person, you pull the trigger, and ideally that person has a worse day than you. The repeating blaster doesn't think like that. The repeating blaster looks at an entire area and says nobody gets to be there anymore. This is where blasters stop being guns and start being area denial systems. A repeating blaster dumps massive amounts of energy through its barrel at rapid cyclic rates, sending a continuous stream of bolts downrange. That's not aiming, that's landscaping. The effective range can stretch out to several hundred meters, but precision is genuinely irrelevant when you're filling a hallway with that much superheated gas. You don't need to hit anyone specifically when the entire zone is uninhabitable. Most of these things are mounted on tripods or bolted directly onto vehicle hardpoints, because holding one while it fires would be like trying to keep a garden hose steady during an earthquake. They're also notorious for overheating during sustained fire, which means the weapon can burn itself out or seize up entirely if you hold the trigger too long, which is, not ideal. Here's the thing about repeating blasters though. They represent a complete philosophy shift in combat. Individual marksmanship stops mattering. You're not dueling anyone, you're saturating a kill zone with enough energy to make standing upright a bad life decision. That's why military forces, mercenary groups, and criminal syndicates all love them equally. If you've ever watched a Clone Wars battle sequence with entrenched repeating blaster positions, chewing through advancing lines of droids or clones, you've seen exactly what these weapons are designed to do. They bridge the gap between infantry rifles and vehicle-mounted cannons, turning 1 or 2 soldiers into a strategic asset. But speaking of weapons that abandoned conventional blaster technology entirely, let's talk about one that ditches plasma bolts for something way more unusual. Bowcaster. The Bowcaster is the most mechanically unique weapon on this list, and it's not even close. Every other blaster we've talked about fires some variation of superheated plasma. The Bowcaster fires explosive quarrels, actual projectiles wrapped in plasma energy. It's closer to a crossbow than a blaster, and Wookiees built it out of tradition. Here's how it works. The Bowcaster uses a magnetic accelerator to launch a metal quarrel enveloped in a plasma casing, but the kicker is that many traditional models require the user to physically pull back the bowstring to cock it. Most non-Wookiees can't even manage that without mechanical assistance. The weapon is essentially gated behind Wookiee-level strength just to operate. A fully charged shot produces impact equivalent to heavy blaster fire. Even a weaker shot still produces enough force to send a stormtrooper into the next zip code. Each quarrel hits with an explosive energy burst on contact, and the rate of fire is limited by that manual cocking mechanism, which sounds like a drawback until you remember that each shot is basically a small detonation. And here's where it gets genuinely frustrating. On paper, the Bowcaster outperforms military standard blaster rifles in raw per-shot damage. It has decent range, superior impact, and built-in explosive capability. No aftermarket modifications needed. This thing comes off the workbench ready to ruin someone's afternoon. Yet the galaxy treats it as a cultural curiosity, a Wookiee novelty item. Nobody in the Republic, the Empire, or the Rebellion ever thought, hey, maybe we should mass produce these. That's not a technology problem. That's institutional arrogance. The most baffling part, Han Solo, a man who spent decades standing next to Chewbacca, who watched this weapon blow people off their feet on a regular basis, still preferred his DL-44 pistol, a gun that is objectively worse in per-shot stopping power. Han tried the bowcaster exactly once in The Force Awakens and reacted like he'd discovered fire. What was he doing for the previous 30 years? Wookiee engineering isn't primitive. It's an entirely different technological philosophy that produces superior results, and the galaxy collectively decided to ignore it. But if a culturally dismissed weapon can outperform standard military hardware, wait until you see what happens when you scale blaster technology up to vehicle size. Blaster cannon. Everything we've talked about so far is a weapon that a person picks up and fires. This is not that. Blaster cannons are what happens when you take the concept of a blaster and scale it up until it stops being a weapon and starts being an engineering project. We're talking vehicle-mounted heavy ordnance, massively increased firing rates, effective range stretching well beyond what any infantry weapon can manage depending on the model. A single blaster cannon generates as much sustained firepower as an entire squad of soldiers with repeating blasters firing simultaneously, which is, a lot of blasters. These things require serious power supplies and cooling systems just to function. You're not strapping this to your hip, you're bolting it to the wing of an X-Wing, the chin of a TIE fighter, or mounting it on an AT-AT Walker. The energy output is sufficient to shred starfighter shields on contact and devastate ground targets with sustained fire. That's not small arms territory anymore, that's heavy artillery. And here's the thing that nobody really stops to think about. We call all of these blasters. The holdout blaster that fits inside a boot, the pistol Han carries on his hip, turbo laser batteries lining the hull of a Star Destroyer that can reduce a city to rubble from orbit. Same basic technology family, completely different universe of destructive capability. The gap between a blaster pistol and a blaster cannon is like comparing a handgun to the main gun on a battleship. They technically operate on similar principles, but the comparison ends there. The X-Wing's 4 laser cannons, the TIE Fighter's twin cannons, the heavy cannons mounted on walkers and gunships. This is where blaster technology stops being about soldiers and starts being about fleets, about orbital bombardments, about wars decided not by who draws faster, but by who has more capital ships in the system. So that's the full spectrum, from a holdout blaster hidden in a boot to turbo lasers that can glass a planet's surface from orbit, all rooted in the same basic energy weapon technology, and all separated by a gap in destructive power so enormous it's almost funny that they share a lineage. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.